It's not what you know, it's what you don't. Vincent Moretti, the Mafia boss, had always lived by that philosophy. Wealth, power, control, he had it all. But there was one thing no amount of money could change. Born deaf, Vincent navigated his world of ruthless deals and high-stakes negotiations in complete silence, using his keen observations and business acumen to stay one step ahead. Tonight, however, something was about to shift. Emily Sullivan, the new maid, was assigned to his estate. A quiet girl with a past she'd rather leave behind. She'd spent most of her life being overlooked. But that would change the moment she stepped into Vincent's world. No one had warned her about the dangers of working for a man like him, nor did she expect the skills she'd honed in silence would one day be the key to surviving in his cold, intimidating world. As she entered the room, her eyes met Vincent's for the first time. He didn't know yet, but he was about to meet the one person who could communicate with him like no one ever had. A connection that would change everything was about to begin, and it wasn't going to be in words. Emily moved swiftly across the lavishly decorated hallway, the soft sound of her footsteps barely audible against the marble floors. The estate was quieter than usual tonight, the weight of silence hanging heavily in the air. As she entered the private dining room, she saw Vincent Moretti, sitting at the head of the table, his piercing eyes scanning the documents in front of him. His presence was commanding, but tonight, there was a slight tension in the way he held himself. Emily knew better than to disturb him. She had learned quickly that silence was often the best course of action in his world. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. As she approached, she placed a glass of water in front of him, her movements deliberate and precise. His gaze flicked up for a moment, meeting hers for the briefest of seconds. She could see the weight of years of decisions in his eyes, the solitude that came with power. He didn't speak, but she didn't expect him to. That was the moment she realized. The subtle exchange, the understanding that passed between them, wasn't one he had with anyone else. He wasn't just the Mafia boss. He was a man who, despite everything, was missing something crucial, and she was about to be the one to fill that void. The next evening, Emily found herself walking the halls of Vincent's estate once more, the weight of the previous night's encounter still lingering in her mind. She was beginning to understand something about him, something she hadn't quite expected. It wasn't just his wealth, his power, or the cold distance that kept everyone at arm's length. It was something deeper, something unspoken. As she entered the dining room, she could feel the tension in the air. Vincent was there again, surrounded by his usual crowd of business partners and associates. But tonight, he seemed different. He was quieter, more introspective, as if something had shifted within him. Emily approached the table, carefully placing the drinks in front of the guests, her movements efficient and graceful. But as she did, Vincent's gaze met hers again, this time longer, more deliberate. For the first time, she saw a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, a question he hadn't asked out loud. She wasn't sure what had caused the change, but in that moment, she knew that whatever had been unspoken between them the night before was now waiting to be acknowledged. There was more to Vincent Moretti than the world saw, and Emily was starting to realize she might be the key to unlocking it. As the days passed, Emily's presence in Vincent's world grew more noticeable. She had always moved quietly, blending into the background, but now there was something different in the way she carried herself. Vincent, despite his usual indifference, began to take notice of her, his glances no longer fleeting, his questions more thoughtful. It was a slow process, one that neither of them fully acknowledged, but it was happening. One evening, as she cleared the table after a particularly tense dinner, Emily felt the shift in the air before she saw it. Vincent, sitting alone now, his back to the room, was staring out of the large window, lost in thought. The soft light from the city below cast shadows across his face, accentuating the weariness that had begun to show. Without thinking, Emily stepped closer, placing a glass of water gently on the table. She had learned over the past few weeks that the silence between them spoke louder than any words could. She didn't need to say anything. Vincent knew she was there. But this time, when she turned to leave, he stopped her. "Emily," he said, his voice quiet but unmistakable. She turned, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just cold authority. It was vulnerability. Vincent's voice was low, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to the commanding tone he usually carried. "Emily, I never asked you your story," he said, his gaze steady but unreadable. Emily paused, the question hanging in the air. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the distant hum of the city below. She could feel the weight of his words, the curiosity that was finally breaking through the layers of power and control he had built around himself. "There's not much to tell," Emily replied, her voice calm, though she could feel her heart race. She wasn't ready to share the details of her life, not yet. But something in the way Vincent was looking at her made her feel like she could. Maybe for the first time, she could. "You don't have to answer," Vincent said, sensing her hesitation. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on her, and for a moment, Emily saw a side of him that was rarely exposed, vulnerable, even lost. She had never seen him like this before. The man who had ruled with silence, who commanded respect with a single glance, was now just another person, broken by the weight of his own isolation. Emily felt a strange tug in her chest, a pull towards him that she couldn't ignore. "Maybe one day, I will," she whispered, her eyes meeting his in a quiet, unspoken understanding. The next few days passed in a blur of routine, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting between her and Vincent. There was a new tension in the air, a subtle change that neither of them acknowledged openly, but it was there, lingering. Vincent had been quiet, more withdrawn than usual, yet there were moments when their paths crossed in the grand estate. Moments when his gaze lingered just a little too long, when his presence felt more intense. One evening, as Emily entered the study to retrieve some files, she found Vincent standing by the window again, staring out at the city. She hesitated at the door, unsure whether to disturb him. But then, as if sensing her presence, he turned. His expression softened, though the hardness in his eyes remained. "You never told me why you came here, Emily," he said, his voice quiet. She could see the flicker of something deep within him, a curiosity, a desire for understanding. Emily had never been one to open up easily, but something in the way he looked at her made her reconsider. "I needed a change," she said simply, her gaze meeting his. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. Vincent nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. For a brief moment, they stood in silence, connected by something unspoken, both aware that this was the start of something neither of them had expected. As the days passed, Emily's life at Vincent's estate began to settle into a rhythm, yet something about it felt different. Vincent's presence no longer felt as distant, as if the walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling. One evening, after the dinner rush had died down and the house was quiet, Emily found herself walking down the hall, her thoughts preoccupied. She was about to pass the study when she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Without thinking, she knocked gently and then entered. Vincent was sitting at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, but his attention was on something far beyond them. He didn't look up right away, but his voice, when it came, was softer than usual. "Come in, Emily." She hesitated before stepping fully inside, unsure of what to expect. There was something different in the air, a sense of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. As she approached, Vincent finally looked up, his sharp gaze locking with hers. "I need your help with something," he said, his usual authority tinged with a vulnerability that caught her off guard. Emily nodded, her pulse quickening. She had always seen Vincent as a man of control, but tonight, for the first time, he seemed to be reaching out, asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. But whatever it was, she knew it was going to change everything. Emily stood silently in front of Vincent's desk, unsure of what to say. His request had thrown her off guard, yet there was something about the way he looked at her, something unspoken in the air, that made her realize this was not just another task. "I need you to help me understand something," Vincent said, his voice low, almost hesitant. He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the desk, as if considering his words carefully. Emily nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had seen the man who commanded entire empires, whose mere presence could bend people to his will, now standing at the edge of vulnerability. The man who was never open to anyone suddenly seemed like he was reaching out. "I've built everything around me," he continued, looking away momentarily, "but it's all empty." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she processed his words. Was this the same man who ran an empire with an iron grip? She had always seen him as invincible, But now, in this moment of openness, she saw the cracks in the facade. She stepped forward, feeling the weight of his unspoken plea. "I don't know what to say, Vincent," she replied softly. "But I'm here. You don't have to do this alone." For the first time, there was no mask, no pretense. Vincent, the untouchable mafia boss, seemed human, and Emily felt a pull toward him that she could no longer deny. The silence that followed her words felt like a weight in the room, but Emily could sense the tension slowly melting away. Vincent didn't answer right away, but his gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than the cold, calculating man she had been serving for weeks. "I've spent my entire life building walls," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "But they've only isolated me more." Emily stepped a little closer, her heart racing. She had never imagined this side of him, a side that wasn't consumed by power or control. "You don't have to keep it all to yourself," she said gently, her voice steady but filled with an understanding that surprised her. Vincent looked up at her, the weight of years of solitude and decisions hanging in his eyes. He was no longer the untouchable figure he once was in her eyes. He was human, fragile, and for the first time, he let his guard down. "Maybe you're right," he said softly, the words heavy with meaning. Emily didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, standing before the man who had once seemed so distant, she realized they had both taken a step towards something neither of them expected.